slide, and I'll just go through logistics and then we'll go into intros and really dive in here. So that's the reason for this webinar. And I just want to speak to for a moment, why does Storytell, and I'll go through logistics and then we'll go into intros and really dive in Angela, here. I think I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Okay. Maybe that's because we just are now live streaming on YouTube, which is one of our logistical items. So took that one out of the way. So now you know. So Storytell exists to make life meaningful by making work meaningful, because how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. And we all have a desire to contribute. And Storytell is here to take what you're doing in your work life and make it a little bit better than you could do on your own with the support of AI. So with that, just share around logistics for this webinar. So Angela, if you could go to the next slide here. So yes, a huge welcome. And this is being recorded and live streamed. And any questions that you have, please just go ahead and share them in chat and we will get to them toward the end of the webinar. We're looking at kind of 35 to 40 minutes. So in the last 5 minutes, we will do some Q&A. But anything that comes to mind, just share it as it comes up and we'll get to it at the end. Okay, without further ado, I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists here, starting with Cheryl Solis, founding technical writer for Stellate. And Cheryl, I believe you have a technical writing community, maybe some of whom are joining us here on this call, but just want to leave the space for you to introduce yourself.
Sure. As most people can see on the slide, I'm a lead technical writer for a company called Stellate.co. They are a metrics and caching GraphQL company. And if you're uncertain as to what that is, go to Stellate.co and dive in. I am also the founding technical writer at this small company, which means I do everything having to do with technical writing and publishing our content. I have an extensive background in technical writing, working as an individual contributor, a director, manager, you name it, I've done it. And I've also served as a writing consultant in Silicon Valley for various companies, like Atlassian comes to mind. And always interested in pursuing interesting ways of making our technical writing task better and easier. So that's it for me.
Amazing. Thank you, Cheryl. Just total wealth of expertise. So try not to poach Cheryl away from Stellate. It will be hard. Manny, I'd love to introduce you. So I believe you're part of your engineer journey started at Meta and then moved into entrepreneurship, and would love for you to just share briefly on that.
Yeah, sure. So hi guys, I'm Manny and I'm a founder. My background is in product and engineering. Started my first business in 2019. That was a health tech startup. We built AI and automation software to streamline insurance billing. Sold that company last year. And now I'm advising AI startups and angel investing.
And I believe you're working on another startup too. Right?
Yeah, that's supposed to be a secret.
Oh, okay, we will say no more.
Nah, joking. Yeah, I'm working on some thing very early in that journey, though. Ideating phase.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that phase is the most fun. So I'd also like to introduce Grant Simmons, who's a VP at Kochava Foundry. And Grant, I understand that is like the strategic consulting arm of Kochava itself, but would love for you to speak to that a bit more.
Yeah. All I know is that Manny's going to start another company. That's what I just heard. And so I'm super excited. No, hi, everybody. I'm Grant Simmons. I'm VP of a group called Founder here in Coachella, which is strategic consulting inside of what's historically been known as a mobile measurement provider. And so what we do at our core at Coachella is we listen to our brand advertisers' conversions inside of their apps. So think iOS and Android apps like Disney Plus and ESPN and Paramount Plus and Peacock and things like that. Lots and lots of gaming apps. And so within that strategic consulting relationship, we ingest, billions of rows of data, and we break it apart, and we come back to the brand partner with what's working and what's not. So it's big data with a capital B and capital D. That's part of the business. And then the other part of the business is trying to figure out how to measure things which have historically been unmeasurable or measurable through a sort of more, we'll call it distinct lens. And so this is things like the ad takes place on the living room device, the big TV, but the demand takes place on the couch sitter's handset. How do you measure that? Same thing with out of home. Ad takes place in Times Square, and how do you capture the demand that would drive on an app? And so we have some really sophisticated ways of doing that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. And so where we'd like to start here is around this journey with AI and what for each of our panelists, like what has that been for you? And Cheryl, I'd love to start with you around this conversation you essentially were having with yourself around how can I be ethical with AI? What does that look like for me? How do I make sense of this for myself, in my role, for my field? And so just want to give you some space to speak to that.
Sure. And I first want to give a shout out. There may be a couple of members of your audience. One person, his name is Clyde Higaki, another Stephanie Blotner. We spent some time thinking about, brainstorming about these very issues in AI. And I just want to give a little shout out to them. The ethical concerns exist and remain. And for me, those were around security, copyright issues, privacy, and job security. And all of those remain as pertinent issues. As I went on my journey and started with Stellit, which is a very small startup company, some of these issues became less prominent in the face of the necessity of helping a startup lift off and present a professional face to the world. The issues remain, and some of them are, it's important to have, to be involved in understanding them and lobbying for the things that are important, both to companies and to individuals, like copyright and privacy. And like any other technology, these issues need to be dealt with from a legal framework, political framework, and a technology framework. So those were my initial concerns, and I can continue or maybe turn it over to my fellow panelists to air their concerns.
Great. Yeah, sounds good. Grant, I'll pass the mic to you.
Yeah, I don't, ethical concerns, once I start thinking about it, I can't stop thinking about it. And so I try not to think about it very much. But I would say one thing specifically around Storytell, and we do speak ethically. Our strategic clients expect us to be good stewards of their data, and we have an ethical responsibility to do so. And one of the things that Storytell makes really nice is I know that I can partition off data that won't leak, that won't persist, and I can keep it in a siloed environment and still get LLM type manifestations up. That's a big deal, because I can trust Storytell to not leak my knowledge anywhere. And I've loaded gigabytes of knowledge at this point. And so from that, I just really appreciate that from a Storytell standpoint. In terms of, you know, AI and where it's going, who knows? We're in our nascent phases. If you want to scare yourself, go look up the gray goo theory or the paperclip theory or things like that. And so there's plenty of speculation out there of what might happen. But for now, it's we'll get into this a little bit, but I'll just suffice to say I'm not using AI the way I thought I would be using it. But I am using it a lot, is what I would say. With that, hey Manny, I'll let you take over.
Yeah, you know, ethical concerns, and there are many, but when I think of some of the stuff we've used AI for, specifically in healthcare, you know, there's always ethical concerns around what you're doing with the data, right? And this is extremely important in healthcare because you're dealing with people's healthcare records, right? And so, you know, how you train on this data, I mean, is there cross-training going on with across patient data across multiple organizations, which is a big no-no, right? There's that piece of it, but then there's also the piece around consistency and precision. And consistency means, you know, if I ask the same question, do I get the same answer? And again, in healthcare, you know, there's only one diagnosis or a few diagnoses, right? Like you cannot have multiple diagnoses. If you have a problem, there's a diagnosis to that problem, and it has to be the same over and over again. So consistency is very, very, very important. And so hallucination is something that really doesn't work within a healthcare setting. And then precision about, you know, how many times you get it right. Ideally within healthcare as well, you want to get it right 100% of the time, right? Realistically, even doctors don't get it right all the time, right? So there is a certain level of error that's acceptable, but then, you know, what is that and how far is it from the right answer, right? So you're dealing with a real doctor, get it wrong, but they'd be around the ballpark, right? They're not going to completely misdiagnose these things. But with AI, because the reasoning is not there, when you think about large language models and the way that's structured, it doesn't really have reasoning built into it, right? It's a probability and engine, right? So because that's not there, you sometimes run into issues, you know, diagnoses are completely off from what you expect it to be. So, you know, that's another concern that you know, I've experienced over time along, you know, some of the fears using AI and adopting AI, especially within a vertical like healthcare.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that. And I think so we're on a journey in this webinar itself of, you know, that starting point. It's not that all of that necessarily disappears, but as we move along in the journey, Cheryl, I'd love to come back to you around like what's the leap that you made? What was that turning point to starting to use AI in your workflows?
My turning point came basically on the basis of two reasons. Necessity, actually three. Necessity, a rethink of how I think about AI and job security. And the third one is my encountering and working with Storytell. So I want to talk about my rethink about AI. There is a lot of concern about how AI is taking our jobs, can take our jobs, etc. But as I was working for this small startup, I began to see that AI can actually enable a proliferation of small startups. It's very hard to create a startup, and there's barriers and obstacles. But with AI, it can be leveraged to help many small businesses overcome those challenges. And so it can expand the market for people who otherwise might not start a startup company, may not have the entrepreneurial frame of mind initially, or be too afraid to do that. And I am beginning to see that AI can help in this area. So in the case of, say, technical writing, the field I'm in, I could see, in addition to, you know, large companies with many writers, we may see a proliferation of many small companies that have maybe one or two writers and use AI to supplement the work. And small startups, have limited resources, and so they may, be able to hire one person or two people, but not the 40 people you might see in a very large company. But AI will give the small startup the ability to present themselves in a professional way. And so AI, I could see it as being essential to helping these small businesses work like larger companies. Now, this is all wrapped in the framework of this is a could be, and I'm seeing some of that happen. But the future is yet to arrive.
Right. And you're writing part of the future too.
Yes. Yes, we are writing part of the future.
Yeah.
So that's some of the rethinking that I did in terms of using AI. And then at my small startup, I encountered Storytell came to our company and gave a presentation. And I tell you, I was initially skeptical, but I started using Storytell in a small way, and I found many things that really satisfied some of my concerns. What as Grant mentioned, one of the things Storytell does is it allows you to choose what information you upload. So you can choose internal only content, or you can go out to the web, or Zoom, or the outside world. And so when I use Storytell, I restrict my use to just things internal to the company. Now there's some leveraging of the LLM, but for the most part, everything I upload to Storytell is within the ecosystem of my company. And this gives me some sense of that I'm using information with the consent of the people in Stellit. And that helps me, sort of restrict what I'm doing to have a certain security and privacy. So that was one of the things that really kind of helped me leverage AI and overcome some of the concerns I had about using it. Other AIs like the general Chat GPT, they're very open-ended and everything is shared with the world. So I like the fact that Storytell gives you the option of limiting what information you leverage.
Cheryl, just to jump in for a moment, one of our users has described it as choosing the subset of the universe that you want to interact with.
Exactly. And that is a very powerful feature and it doesn't entirely, but it does help allay some of the ethical concerns that we all have around AI and its impact on people's copyright or their IP and security, which is very important to companies. And here's a good example. When using Storytell, you can choose how you share that information. You can restrict it to just yourself, only the people on your team or within your organization, or if you want to and don't have any concerns about it, you can share it with anyone via sharing a link. And it gives you these options. It puts you in the driver's seat, so to speak. So that was something that I also really valued when I started using Storytell as my AI co-pilot.
Awesome. And we'll come back to you, Cheryl, to learn a little bit more about how, like, what it is that you're doing with Storytell, and just give space here for you, Grant, to speak to what you're up to with AI.
Yeah, the big sort of turnover for me was, and I think everybody on the call has probably been around this notion of AI for a bit, even though in an LLM world, this is sort of a new iteration. Although, you know, in our pre-brief, even these folks were playing around with it even before any of us, the rest of us, knew LLM. So it's been around for a bit. But even with Chat GPT, right, it'll help answer interesting questions. And they finally had a bunch of extensions that allow you to do other things around imagery or around CSVs, XML, things like that. But each one of those is still siloed. And so if you think about, you know, a marketer's analyst job of both doing the analysis, constructing the story, and then coming up with ideally clarity of thought as to what the client should do, there's a lot of skill sets going on. And one of the things that Cheryl brought up earlier is that, yeah, one of the manifestations is it's a lot better at stuff that I'm not good at, right? And so it helps shore up those gaps just in my own ability. And so if I think about how I use it, the big turning point for me was largely the unstructured nature of Storytell, because I can load up a webinar that I gave, and I can have a CSV that I analyzed, and I can have a white paper that I wrote, and maybe somebody else's PDF of challenges and opportunities. And I can say, hey, look, use this knowledge over here to answer this. And I can guide it a little bit. And at this point, I've built my own voice in Storytell, and it is multiplexed me quite a bit. And so my big turning point was largely, it was two things. It was the ability for me to take data that I do not want to have leaked, and knowledge I do not want to share, quite frankly, and knowing that that isn't going to leak, and the ability to have just a hopper that you can just throw unstructured things into that the software itself makes sense out of. It's been remarkable.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And I've heard you refer to yourself as a bit of a superhero with the support.
Let's not get carried away.
Fair enough. So Manny, what I think is so interesting about what you bring to the table here is it's not just a particular workflow, but you built it into your company. And you know, this last startup that you sold. So I would love to just hear about your journey with machine learning and AI.
Yeah. No, this whole idea of working with any type of unstructured data is so powerful. We have it now, but you know, it's very easy to take it for granted. And I'll tell you how it's related to my story. So my AI journey starts in 2019 when we started building the business, and you know, we're working on AI here when it wasn't cool and everyone was building it, right? And what we were trying to do at the time was we're working with SMB doctors, and these doctors are swarmed, they're overworked, but they have to obviously get paid. And a big part of the way they get paid is through insurance billing. But insurance billing is a pain. There's a lot that goes into it, corresponding back and forth with the insurance company. And so we were trying to build tools, AI tools, to essentially help them with that type part of their process. And the initial version of that was like, hey, look, why don't we just pay them up front, right? So we give them an upfront fee for whatever they want to submit to the insurance company, and then we'll handle all the stuff in the back end using our AI tools. Finally, when the insurance pays, because this usually takes a while, 30 to 60 days, we take the money we gave to them back, and then we charge them a fee. So at the time, we had to use AI to, one, predict how much we thought the insurance was going to pay for their account receivable. There's a lot that goes into that because of denials. We also wanted to be able to communicate that cost to the doctor in a very efficient way. So we're thinking about a chat bot. And then we also wanted to be able to explain the bills to the patient and represent that in another format. So think of a chat board or a PDF that you would generate for the patient. So now these are all very, very different things. And back then, you literally had to train a model for every single piece of this thing we're trying to build. So the chatbot, you didn't have out of the box chat GPT that would just talk to you, right? So that was a model, and that was an entire project. Being able to represent data like as a PDF, email, and just really interact with data in different ways. It was also very challenging. There were some OCR tools back then, but not nearly as easy as it is to do today. So it was extremely expensive to take this on. And very early, we realized that we had to raise a lot of capital to really do this in a way that would scale and actually worked. Capital is a big constraint for startups, so we had to scrap some of the ideas. Like the chatbot thing didn't actually ever happen just because of how much work it would have gone to build that. Now, fast forward to 2023, and ChatGPT launches, and we've had tools that we've built over the years. And one of these tools was something called an explanation of benefits. This would essentially go through your entire medical history, look at your bill, and then present to you in a very simple manner. Hey, this is what the insurance companies is charging you for. Why do you have to pay $1,000? Well, it's because these are the things that insurance cover. These are the things that insurance is not covered. It's your deductible, etc. So we built this tool that would do it and present this data in a PDF format to the patient, and it required a lot of analysis, ML, and all these things to make it happen. And so I take this anonymized data set that we have in the back end, and I fit it into like a ChatGPT plugin. And the thing we spent almost 4 years building, ChatGPT essentially gets close to the answer with the first response, one-shot learning. It was at that point that I realized that this thing was going to be, extremely big. And so we started looking for ways we could incorporate. Obviously, at the time, there was a lot around, data privacy, HIPAA, and all that. So we had to make sure we built the right data source to store the data in a confident manner. There was issues around anonymizing the data before sending it to an LLM too. So we built all of that with the intention of really replacing some of these workflow interpreters and that data analysis that we're doing with models we had created with these LLMs that are just much better and fast and easier at doing it. The multimodal aspect of it is just amazing, right? And so in healthcare, where you have fax records, right? Because you're still faxing the insurance companies, you have folks you talk to via email, you have messages, you get data in so many different formats. And, with AI now, you're able to really extract real insights from these different data sets very easily and then make sense out of it. So, it's now much easier to build on top of some of the tools out there. And I think it's going to continue to get easier as these models get better.
Yeah, absolutely. On that last point that you're making, Manny, one of our users has spoken to this essential. If you look at unstructured data, it's this pot of gold. And yet, because, prior to the LLMs, you haven't really been able to extract any of that gold. It's been worthless. And so something that has a lot of value within it, there's no way to access it. So essentially it's not there. So you miss the worth of it, miss the value, and miss insights too that you could be gathering.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, coming back around to you, Cheryl, around what is it that you're using Storytell or AI for? How is that part of your work life?
So I want to start by taking a riff off of what Manny was focused on, which is the unstructured data. So as a technical writer, we have to synthesize lots of information coming from many different sources, interviews with engineers, videos, Slack messages, write-ups, notes, and this too is coming from many different points of origin. Added to that complexity is the fact that in many companies that require technical writing, especially software startups, the sources of the information, software engineers, live and work in many different geographies. They're all over the world. And unless you can go without sleep, it is often hard to coordinate with somebody in, say, Taiwan and France and Mexico and Hawaii, and be able to do a good job. What I found out at Stellit is many of my engineers working in Europe and elsewhere, they like to create videos explaining a product or a feature. And at first I started, sort of reviewing those videos and manually picking out the right information. That was exhaustive. And faced with the complexity of trying to understand, say, we might have a feature launch and I have 30 days to assemble documentation for 7 different products, all of which are extremely complex. Edge caching on CDNs, metrics for GraphQL. That became an almost insurmountable task. And so the choice was miss deadlines or leverage what AI can do. And so I would upload videos. AI would be able to synthesize it and spit out the pertinent pieces of information that I needed. So uploading videos, it reduced the manual task of transcribing. The same thing with Slack messages and notes and wikis and things like that. So if I upload all of that information within the company, leveraging only this internal information, I'm able to train or mentor, perhaps coach the AI to give me the structured information that I'm looking for. In the case of technical writing, we offer very structured information based on user needs, and it takes a while for the AI to get that. It's almost like training a puppy, but it learns very quickly, and so I was able to upload all this information and start creating through Storytell's tags the type of structures that I was looking for. So here's an example. In the technical writing field, we use a model of documentation called DITA, and it divides information into various categories: concepts, tasks, that is activities or procedures, and reference. Those are the top 3. There's a few others like processes, etc. And most people often turn these into like hybrid topics. And so what I was able to do is upload my information, tag the parts of it that were either concepts or pure reference or tasks, and then have the AI stitch them together for me. So we'll see here in this example, most of us have to do glossaries because we're in new fields and they're constantly having reams of new words for things. So doing a glossary is a very repetitive task. It is fairly rote, and often you wind up having to go bother a bunch of engineers to extract what is this? What is an LLM? With Storytell, I was able to upload our corporate information or the engineering information and have it distill the descriptions for a glossary. So assigning somebody a glossary or say release notes, these are often kind of introductory activities for technical writers. And in a small startup company, you don't have that luxury. And so Storytell became my intern. And I was able to work with it to train it to generate these sort of rote things. So what does that do? What does that do for me? Is it going to take over my job? No, not right away. There's a long road there, because what it doesn't do, it can generate information, but it cannot put that information in, say, Visual Studio Code and Markdown for the publishing tools to publish it to the web. And it can't, integrate all of that just yet. But what it does do is increase productivity by offloading repetitive tasks, and that gives me the freedom to focus on more complex content like tutorials and walkthroughs. These are often things that most startups never get to until they're large companies, and even large companies have trouble meeting, the fast feature releases, and they leave those aside to some future ideal day when the writer has a lot of time and resources to get to them. Well, the AI, working with an AI, has freed me from many of the rote tasks you must do and allowed me to work on things like complex tutorials that involve a lot of procedures and walkthroughs. So the other thing that it has done, two other things. One, working in a small startup, and this is probably even true when you work in a large company, is you have to generate lots of material. The voracious need for understanding the product is out there. And although companies may say, we want you to have a good work-life balance, the necessity of meeting your launch dates really shuts that aside. If something has to go out, it has to go out. But using the AI for common rote tasks helped me to achieve a work-life balance that I really haven't had in any other company. Largely because even with many writers, the necessity of meeting deadlines just kind of turns that whole idea of work-life balance on its head. So AI has been able to enhance my life in giving me that balance.
That's amazing. And I think that's part of making life meaningful as well, is having that balance. And something that I see you doing, Cheryl, as you're, working with Storytell, that's really incredible, and I think really instructive for anyone working with an LLM, is bringing an editor's mindset to it of like, what, actually scrap that, do this instead. I want this in that voice, as opposed to, I'm going to try once, and if it doesn't give me what I want on the first try, then I'm just going to go. It can't do it. It's not capable. And Manny, I'm sure you're bringing that to your experiences. Grant, I know you are. And Grant, I've also heard you speak to kind of a parallel of what Cheryl's saying around what the AI can do and what it can't do.
Yeah. I first came to this, and particularly Storytell, thinking that it would actually do a lot of data analysis for me, and it hasn't. And even though, and that's actually, if I were to sort of take Cheryl's list, it would be probably in the exact same order. It's time savings, and it's not like I have a ton of repetitive tasks. Everything is always a little different. But the time savings is no less profound in that. And it's really through sort of the tagging and grouping. And again, I have such an appreciation for that. So if you think about my world lives on iOS and Android devices, so I can make an iOS and Android tag. And then the media I'm measuring is display or video or search or TikTok or Meta. And so you can start to imagine the types of tagging and combinations of tagging. And so just the time savings of just the organization of material. And the close cousin to that is the clarity of thought. And so, much like Cheryl had talked about, this stuff is wildly complicated. And we start to talk about row level data at the device level across billions of impressions. It gets pretty weedy pretty quick. And so Storytell does a really good job of providing clarity of thought as to concepts. I can largely throw just a big word salad at it and then get back, hey, here's how I want it displayed back. I want it in 2 columns. I want the challenges in column 1. I want 8 of them. Go through all of my knowledge, find the products that you think might be opportunities or solutions to these. I want that in the 2nd column. I want you to pull in X, Y, or Z. And like Cheryl said, I might have to iterate a couple times, but it isn't that many. But it's largely around sort of that organization and structure. Getting that right is sort of challenging, and you're not going to get it right out of the gate, but the iteration around just the organization has been pretty big. And then the last one is data analysis, and I'm still enamored by it. Been working with Storytell, and we've trained the model to go grab the right sort of Python libraries now. And so now the question is going to be, will the machine make the same recommendation that I would? Would we find the same finding? And so that's a little test we're going through now. But you know, the first one's that time savings. And where does it break? Where does it stop? I don't know. It's certainly multiplexed me. And if it's multiplexed me, it's probably multiplexed lots of people. And so lots of people have much higher capacity for business now. But at some point in time, that bubble pops. And I'm not exactly sure what that looks like, but I'm excited to see.
Yeah, I guess we're all going to find out together.
I guess we're going to find out. Yep.
Manny, I wonder if, as we kind of move into perhaps even advice for folks who are not sure where to get started with AI, and Manny, you're in a position to speak to co-founders or someone who's like, there's so many AI startups now, like what should I consider as I start on that journey? So everyone's going to have a little different vantage point. But yeah, would love for you to kick that off.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, you know, I like to tell folks that like AI is just a tool, right? And you should really look at that, answer that question in terms of the way you would answer it with any other category or tool that you're really interested in getting into, right? So, you know, what are you passionate about? What are the things that you like working on? You know, you want to look at that and then think about what you actually are good at, like what have you trained and gone to school for, right? And you have skills at, and then you take that intersection and look at where the technology is at today. I think that's important, and that's probably something that's unique to the AI category, right? Like Grant and Cheryl have both said, there are things that, you know, LM's AI tools are really, really good at. And there's certain things that they're still catching up on, right? We're going to get there maybe a couple of years from now, but, you know, it's not just there yet. Analysis, because of consistency issues that you might face, and hallucination, right? Maybe that's not where you start, or maybe that's where you start because you want to solve that problem, right? Well, being able to really think about that in those 3 categories, you know, what am I passionate about? What skills do I have? And then where's the technology? And how does that intersect with the other 2 categories is extremely important. And I think if you do that well, then at least that gives you a direction of where you should, you know, start exploring ideas.
Yeah, great. And, you know, I'm just going to also share something a bit in that line that, Grant, I've heard you say is like, AI isn't going to make you an expert in something. You already have to have some expertise. For sure, it can help you get up to speed on things very quickly. But you need to come to the table with your expertise in order to really partner well with AI. And then from Grant and Cheryl, what would you say to folks who want to start using AI at work and aren't really sure where to get started? So I don't know who would like to jump on that.
I can just speak from my own experience. Where I got started was by the time Storytell had showed up, I had already sort of gotten my feet wet a little bit with AI, just sort of in general. But my first starting spot was, I think if you're like me and you have lots and lots of material already, your first exercise is uploading that knowledge and starting to understand the forms and patterns by which it can get organized. And once you sort of start to wrap your head around that, it goes pretty quick. You can start asking questions of your own material, and it becomes eye-opening pretty quick. That was my experience.
Okay, so start by uploading your knowledge. Cheryl, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. I agree with Grant. You could even start with just asking Storytell, if you're using that or another AI, simple questions. One of the wonderful things about AI is it is judgment free. If you go, let's say you're trying to install some piece of software and you have a problem, right? You could go to another human being and ask them for help. They're busy. You could go to the AI and say, okay, I've gotten on step 4 of installing NPM, and I'm stuck. Nothing's happening except, and the AI will provide you the information and it won't judge you. And that is incredibly freeing. And so if you have a question about something technical, or something else, start there. Start with having it help you. And then as you go from there to your actual work, you can use the AI. You can put yourself back in charge and you can say, this is what I want from you. I want to see this, 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 and this. And you upload your knowledge, and then you start training it to give you what you want. If you just ask a question, it's going to use a predictive model in order to give you an answer. And that may be wildly away from what you're actually looking for. But if you give it structure and say, I want to see two conceptual paragraphs about plugins, and in this format, taken from these tagged items. So I had, did a reference or did a concept, and, everything that I tag with that, I can say, take everything tagged concept and take this tag called plugin, synthesize it, and give me 2 paragraphs about it. And then you may have a little iteration because it may give you more than you want or less than you want, and you keep probing. And it is, for technical writers, very much like sitting across with an engineer and doing that verbal exchange of extracting information from this resource. And AI can help multiplex, it's a great word that Grant uses, multiplex your abilities. So that's how I tend to use Storytell, and those little extra features it has, like tagging and security sharing related, and the fact that you can iterate with the AI and have it remember these iterations to create almost template-like functions. So I might have to write about plugins, and I will upload previous things I've written and say, I have a new plugin to write about. Take what I've written before, use that same structure. Here's some new information. I've tagged it, and synthesize something similar for this new feature.
Yeah.
I still have to supplement the writing because it's sometimes not correct, but it learns. And so as I've gone through this, the learning cycle is shorter and shorter. So it takes very few, 1 or 2 iterations for me to derive from the AI what I want. So
Amazing.
that's how I use it.
Thank you, Cheryl. And I think you just gave us a little class in prompting too, just all that specificity. Sometimes I joke that it's being a dictator with words. It's like very, very clear, very specific. I want this, I don't want that, etc. Just keep iterating.
Exactly.
In terms of where we are with the webinar this morning, I think just moving into questions, some of which we've addressed. There were questions ahead of time from folks who registered about job security. I think we touched on that. And so there is one in our Q&A that I'm not sure if someone would like to speak to in terms of, from Michael Lee, around ethical concerns, like This is a big question, and I don't know that any of us are, I mean, I know that none of us are copyright lawyers on this call, but distinguishing between inspiration and ripoff, no obligation to answer this exhaustively, but from our panelists, if there's anyone who would want to respond to this, I mean, there are, trials going on right now, suits around this, really looking at fair use and how do you make sense of that. So
yeah, I'm not sure it's Storytell's problem to solve in terms of the books of knowledge that the LLM was trained on. I mean, I think we could make the argument that there were probably some ethical considerations that weren't considered, right?
Yeah.
I think it's interesting we get in this notion. That's a really clever way to put it, whoever wrote that question of inspiration versus theft.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure there's any great mechanism for it now other than, let's say, blockchain type technologies where there's an inception of an idea and it can be asserted digitally that was the inception. And so we are quite a ways away from that, but I'm not sure there's any great solution right now.
I do want to jump in and mention something about Storytell, an additional item that I do like.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll jump back to the ethical question. When you upload information to Storytell, it provides the something equivalent to footnotes.
Mm-hmm.
It marks the sources of your information.
Mm-hmm.
And that is another area where I appreciate this extra layer of functionality that Storytell provides. Because let's say somebody comes and says, you plagiarized X, and it's some outside company. Well, I can go back to the source of information and say, oh, this information came from an engineer talking about their feature, because here's the footnote, here's exactly where I derived the information. So that is a great feature that I like about Storytell. The broader ethical concerns are, yes, there. But like any technology, there are layers of the onion that you have to unravel. What is your personal level of ethics of when you approach this? And people will have different levels. My level is use internal content with ease because the people within the company agree that their information is shareable across the company and to customers. So that's where I personally draw the line. As to our responsibility in regards to the use of AI in the world and the limitations thereof, the tools like ChatGPT that drew from a lot of different sources, that we get into a very funny area, because all of us have the equivalent of an LLM in our brains. We read many things throughout our lives and synthesize them in different ways to generate new things. And if the AIs do not use the sources word for word, we get in that little fuzzy area because in copyright laws, if you change like a major art, let's say somebody copied the Mona Lisa, but they gave it a mustache. I think under copyright laws, that is considered legitimate. However, and I can only speak for myself, I do think copyright laws need to be updated such that the individuals making creative works while they are alive get the credit and perhaps monetary gain from their material, unless they release it. And there was some recording star that released their voice to AI to reproduce. So I think, and that is a political, legal activity. And if somebody is concerned about AI ethics, there are some organizations to get involved in, and then some leverage one can have in terms of the political and legal realm. But the first line of addressing this is the personal. Where do you draw the line, and what are your ethical standards, and how can you use AI and still retain those ethical standards? So that's my thinking on it.
Beautiful. I love that framework. And also this concept of we all have an LLM inside and just acknowledging that. I think, and to your point, Grant, you're right that while we have a proprietary algorithm, which is what, you know, delivers these story tiles or inline citations that always take you back to the source, we are not currently training a model. And so we live on top of many other models. And that brings us to our very last point, which is, Angela, if you can share the coupon code here in that screen. So congrats to everyone who has made it this far. So just offering a 90% discount on a pro or team plans to do model switching. Claude 3 has recently been released, and some of its models are more powerful than GPT-4. So if you're interested in trying Storytell, you could always do a free account, and there's really no reason right now not to get a taste of the more powerful models as well. So just huge thank you, Grant, Manny, Cheryl, for your time today, everyone who joined us, everyone who will join us and watch the recording. So much appreciation to you all. Thank you for teaching us how you're using AI.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For bringing us together,
A lot of fun.
Erica.
Appreciate it.